Hare Krishna, Jai Sri Radhe. Christianity is a hybrid hodgepodge of distorted Vedic legends and practices. 2000 years ago in Europe, following the breakup of worldwide Vedic culture, several Vedic sects were vying with one another to gain popularity, recognition, and support. One of them was Christian, alias Christian sect. It was joined by a frustrated, ambitious, fiery, short-tempered individual known as Gopal, alias Gosal. It is this person who later emerged as Saint Paul. Like Adolf Hitler, Paul used to deliver fiery speeches at several places from Jerusalem to Corinth, accusing his detractors of doing injustice to him and murdering God himself by expelling him from the management of the Krishna temple in Jerusalem. An indication that an ambitious Paul, hankering for leadership, had many enemies, may be heard in his second epistle to Timothy, in which Paul says, quote, Alexander the coppersmith did me much evil. Of him be thou aware also, for he hath greatly withstood our words. Unquote. Paul's incessant, itinerant campaigning and angry speeches, exuding an earnestness arising out of a sense of injured innocence, attracted high-strung, volatile elements. These Christians, alias Christians, were small groups in a few isolated cities. Around 1 AD, they used to meet in private houses and discuss about some murdered god referred to by Paul. This continued for 300 years. Paul had long been dead. Christ was never born. Yet Paul's talk of a murdered God was being repeated by his followers at their weekly meetings at Jerusalem, Corinth, and Rome. Weird details of a betrayal, accusation, trial, and crucifixion came to be added at random. This is how the track legend of a non-existent Jesus' birth and death got built up by the start of the 4th century. A pursual of St. Paul's life as given in the Encyclopedia Britannica will convince the readers of the analysis if read between the lines. Just at that juncture, the group in Rome succeeded in winning over the fickle Emperor Constantine to join their faith, and thereafter the Roman troops swung into action and beat every European into submission through a 1,000-year coercive campaign. This is the sordid story of the spread of Christianity. The forefathers of today's Europeans themselves suffered harrowing atrocities in Italy, Spain, Portugal, France, and other countries. But unfortunately, because of wholesale conversion from saint to sinner and from prince to pauper, there is none left to investigate into and write about the terror and tyranny of Christian conversions. Viewers may realize from this analysis that it was not Jesus who founded Christianity, because Jesus is a fictitious personality. The credit or the discredit for the spread of Christianity in the initial stage must go to Saint Paul, and later in a big military way to Constantine. Ever since Christianity received imperial support, sumptuously paid preachers have been employed and deployed all over the world in ever-growing numbers by Europeans and Americans, especially as a result of their political ascendancy during the last 3 centuries. But so far as theology, scripture, and ritual is concerned, Christianity is a mere label put on ancient Vedic tradition, as we shall indicate in this episode by quoting a number of Christian sources themselves. First, let us consider the Bible itself. That is a hodgepodge of the Old Testament. The New Testament versions written by several persons such as Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John at different places and different times. The Apocrypha and even angry correspondence. Even that heterogeneous collection is all a haphazard translation from language to language, changed at will by the translators or their mentors to suit their own convenience, convictions, or predilections. From Aramaic to Greek, Greek to Latin, and thence to French, German, English, etc. etc. The term Aramaic is from Arya and therefore a form of Sanskrit. The introduction to the Holy Bible, printed by the Cambridge University Press, London, informs us that, quote, Latin translation of the Old Testament were too many to be all good. Moreover, they were not from the original Hebrew, but from Greek versions, and Greek versions were not altogether clear. The Latin version derived from it was all muddy. Some believed that Lucian and Necias had made some false additions to the Old Testaments. Therefore, Saint Jerome and Saint Chrysostom excluded them. Unquote. All this amounts to a confession of Christian hanky-panky confusion. Now, who knows whether Lucian and Necias had introduced new matter or Saint Jerome and Saint Chrysostom? It could have been the latter or all of them and many others for all we know. If we can still lay our hands on some Greek and Hebrew traditions of, say, 3000 BC, we are sure that we shall find therein the names of Krishna, Hari, Vasudeva and Keshav. But since these names have percolated from the Aramaic, Greek and Hebrew in Latin, Arabic, English, French, German, etc., those ancient Sanskrit names have undergone considerable change in spelling and pronunciation. For instance, the name Krishna is being spelled as Christ and Quirinus, Hari as Henry or Harry, Keshav as Jehovah, Hercules as Hercules, Ganesh as Janus, and so on. A diversity of senses mentioned in the margin of ancient Bibles made various translators pick up any one interpretation at any place, any time, which made their fancy, and also to give their own twist to it. Occur in the belief that since there were so many different versions, some more variations of their own making could not be objected to. Removing shoes while entering homes and temples is a wholly Vedic custom. The evidence about this in the Bible is a clear indication of the prevalence of Vedic culture in pre-Christian Europe. Thus we read in the chapter 3 of Exodus, quote, The angel of the Lord appeared unto him in a flame of fire out of the midst of a bush. He said, Moses, Moses, put off thy shoes from off thy feet, for the place wherein thou standest is holy ground, unquote. And again God said unto Moses, quote, I am that, unquote. This is a translation of the Sanskrit Aham Tat Sat or Om Tat Sat of the Vedic terminology. Pictures of pre-Christian life in Europe reveal that people there used to wear dhotis, cover their bodies with a shoulder cloth, wear a holy thread slung across their left shoulder, and display ash and sandal paste marks on their foreheads and torsos. These are all unmistakable signs of their earlier Vedic culture. Even the term baptism is the Sanskrit term baspitizim, means we have been sprinkled with holy water. The Sanskrit term baspitizim has been jumbled and wrongly spelled as baptism. The initial letter S in the Sanskrit spelling has got dropped in European pronunciation. According to Christian tradition, young Jesus was baptized even before the Christianity by John the Baptist. This has very deep implications which people overlook. It indicates that John was a professional Brahmin who used to conduct thread ceremonies, and that the fictitious Jesus was subjected to that ritual. The name John is a European corruption of the Sanskrit name Juan or Javan. Jesus was taken to a river and made to take a bath to the chanting of holy Vedic mantras. An indirect corroboration of this may be found in other historical records. that Christian and Muslims still adopt the ancient Vedic wedding rituals. In Vedic tradition, the thread ceremony and wedding are two important Vedic sacraments in every person's life, one marking the beginning of one's educational career and the other of marital life. Currently, Christmas alias Xmas is fancied to be the biggest, guest and longest Christian festival. But it needs to be told to everybody that neither the name nor the content of the festival have any Christian element within them. The name Christmas is the Sanskrit term Krishna Mas, means the month of Lord Krishna, as elaborated in my previous episodes. A bell hangs in every church because so-called churches are actual Krishna temples or they are proselytized substitutes. In fact, the very word bell is Sanskrit. Bal means strength because it adds force to the voice of prayer in invoking divinity. The fancied Christian page, bell, book and candle is a relic of earlier Krishna worship with a bell, the holy book Bhagavad Gita and the holy light which is waved in circular clockwise locus around the divine face. The 25th December is neither the date of Christ's birth nor is the midnight hour the time of so-called Christ's birth, as is admitted by all Christian scholars themselves. And yet, Christmas continues to be merrily celebrated by all Christians all over the world with great abandon, literally abandoning all thought of its non-Christian character, because despite proselytization, they still continue their earlier Christmas festival. Christmas, being a famous Saturnalia of Vedic tradition, the obscure Christian groups of early days used to participate in them through family tradition. Later, as Constantine's Roman troops spread Christianity with terror and torture, the Christians very shrewdly synchronized their fictitious Jesus' birth with the pre-Christian Saturnalia and Krishna festival. This is admitted in numerous publications by Christian writers themselves. One of them is titled, quote, The Plain Truth About Christmas, unquote, published by a staunch Christian organization named, quote, Worldwide Church of God, unquote, Post Box number 6727, Mumbai 400062, India. The booklet, apparently pleading to rid Christianity of its non-Christian content, makes many revealing confessions that the worldwide church and its followers who seek to alert blind adherents are themselves blind followers of Christianity seems to have escaped their notice. The booklet I mentioned earlier rightly points out in the pages 1 to 6 that, quote, by nature all Christians, and of course in general, tend to follow the crowd, whether right or wrong. Sheep follow others to the slaughter. Humans ought to check up where they are going. Most people have supposed a lot of things about Christmas that are not true. Christmas came not from the New Testament, not from the Bible, not from the original apostles, who were personally instructed by Christ, but it gravitated in the 4th century into the Roman Church from paganism. Since the celebration of Christmas has come from the Roman Catholic Church, let us examine the Catholic Encyclopedia, 1911 AD edition, published by that church, under the heading Christmas. You will find Christmas was not among the earliest festivals of the church. The first evidence of the feast is from the Egypt pagan customs centering around the January calends gravitated in Christmas, unquote. So, this extract is a confession by the staunchest Christians themselves that Christmas is a non-Christian festival. But we should remember there are many other illogical elements in it. The writer of, quote, The Plain Truth About Christmas, unquote, as I have mentioned earlier, is wrong in assuming that but for isolated elements like Christmas, which have got accidentally assimilated into Christian tradition, Christianity is a genuine original religion. We should clearly understand that the whole of Christianity is a mere isolated chunk of earlier Vedic tradition. If one goes on examining and chucking out non-Christian elements from Christianity, then the remainder will be zero. Even the name Christianity is the Sanskrit term Krishna Niti, means the principles or rules prescribed by Lord Krishna. Jesus himself is a fictitious namesake for Krishna. Therefore, the allusion to Christ's personal instructions to his apostles are all imaginary stuff. Had there really been any Jesus, his instructions would have been meticulously followed, and the present padding of pre-Christian festivals would not have been necessary or possible. The third assertion of the previously quoted extract that Christmas drafted to Christianity in the 4th century AD is not true. What happened was just the reverse, namely that in the 4th century, with the support of the Roman troops, convert Christians misappropriated all existing pre-Christian Vedic practices and stamped them as Christian. It was a simple act of total proselytization, a trick, a sleight of hand. Everything pagan means Vedic was overnight dubbed as Christian. Therefore, what needs to be done now is not to decry individual observances such as Christmas, but to abandon the total Christian mask and accept the traditions to be Vedic Hindu. The Encyclopedia Britannica 1964 edition also admits that, quote, Christmas was not among the earliest festivals of the church, unquote. It was not instituted by Christ because there never was any Christ, but St. Paul and his associates, who were the real unwitting founders of Christianity, used to observe a Krishna alias Saturnalia festival in December in their non-Christian households. Later, when St. Paul and his successors gradually cut themselves off from their Vedic background and sought to lead a separate existence out of vanity and dreams of leadership, their old Vedic festivals stuck to them and drafted along with them into Christianity. That is why every fancied Christian practice is an earlier Vedic Hindu tradition, exactly as many demonic modern Indian yoga gurus who have established their own devilish cult all over the world. On page 3, the booklet, The Plain Truth About Christmas, states, quote, Jesus was not even born in the winter, unquote. Adam Clark's commentary, volume 6, page 370, New York edition, states, quote, our Lord was not born on the 25th December when no flocks were out in the fields. The exact date of Jesus' birth is entirely unknown, unquote. Then the question is, why does Christmas masquerade as a Christian festival? The new Shab Hershog Encyclopedia of Religious Knowledge explains that, quote, the date of the festival depended upon the pagan Brumala, December 25th, following the Saturnalia, December 17 to 24, and celebrating the shortest day of the year and the new sun. The pagan Saturnalia and Brumala were too deeply entrenched in popular custom to be set aside by Christian influence, unquote. In the early days of Christianity, the earlier Vedic tradition of fashioning all forms of entertainment, such as dance and drama, exclusively around religious themes, continued for several centuries. The white apparel of the fairies is laid down in the hoary Vedic authoritative compendium known as Natya Shastra by Bharat. Even the term fairy will be seen to be a truncated form of the Sanskrit Vedic term Apsara. If we eliminate letters A and S, and we find that the remainder para is pronounced by the Muslim as pari and by Christians as fairy. The Islamic terms khud means self and khuda means divinity are coined on the Vedic parallel of Atma and Paramatma. The Christian who explained the term devil as a fallen god ought to realize the term deval in Sanskrit signifies exactly the divine origin. The same encyclopedia also reveals that Emperor Constantine incorporated Sunday as a day of Christian rest, alias holiday, because Sunday was the pre-Christian pagan day of Sun Worship. Far from encouraging Christmas as a Christian festival, some Orthodox Christian countries went so far in the early days of Christianity as to ban the celebration of Christmas by statute. A statute passed in 1660 AD by the Massachusetts Bay Colony in New England, USA, prohibiting the observance of Christmas, declared, quote, public notice, the observation of Christmas having been deemed a sacrilege, the exchanging of gifts and greetings, dressing in fine clothing, feasting and similar satanical practices are hereby forbidden, with the offender liable to a fine of 5 shillings, unquote. Similarly, in 17th century England, Christmas celebration were banned as, quote, pagan and papish, saturnalia and satanic, idolatrous and leading to idealness, unquote. Here, the term pagan and papish is again a clear admission that the papacy is a pre-Christian pagan, means Hindu Vedic institution. An organization known as Jehovah's Witness had declared in the article, quote, is Christmas really pagan? Unquote, in its journal titled Awake, December 22, 1981 issue, had mentioned that, quote, all the standard encyclopedias and reference works agree that the date of Jesus' birth is unknown and that the church borrowed the date of December 25th from the Romans along with their customs and festivals, unquote. Encyclopedia Britannica observes that, quote, the ecclesiastical calendar retains numerous remnants of pre-Christian festivals, notably Christmas, which blends elements including both the feast of the Saturnalia and the birthday of Mithra, unquote. Again, Encyclopedia Americana records, quote, it is usually held that the day, means December 25, was chosen to correspond to pagan festivals that took place around the time of the winter solstice, when the days began to lengthen, to celebrate the rebirth of the sun, unquote. The New Catholic Encyclopedia notes that, quote, on this day, means December 25, as the sun began its return to northern skies, the pagan devotees of Mithra celebrated the birthday of the invincible sun, unquote. Saturnalia was a 7-day Roman festival, according to Western scholars' understanding, running from December 17 to December 24, held in honor of Saturn. The festival was marked by boisterous feasting, drinking, merrymaking, dancing, gift-giving, and by decorating the homes with evergreens. From all these references, it is apparent that Christmas is being celebrated all over the world not because of Christians, but in spite of Christians. It would therefore be more truthful, honest, and spiritually elevating if so-called Christians give up their separatist label and straightway declare themselves to be followers of Vedic culture, since what they are following in the name of Christianity is abhorred by Christian tenets, but is adored by the Hindu Vedic doctrine, as I have explained in this episode earlier. On the one hand, they offend Christianity by observing Vedic traditions, while on the other, they violate Vedic culture by calling themselves Christians. This way, they are guilty of a dual spiritual heresy. Thus, the conclusion is what Europeans mistakenly declare to be Christianity or even Roman paganism is in fact Vedic Hinduism. The ancient Vedic custom of applying ash and sandal paste to one's body after bath is still retained by Christianity in the observance of an Ash Wednesday. Also, the so-called All Souls Day is an exact translation of the Vedic observance of Sarva Pitru or Pitri Amavasya, the day fixed by tradition for the worship of all deceased ancestors. Esther is the name of an ancient deity of the spring season worshipped on the Vedic New Year day during March and April. That was also the day on which the first Yadav tribe, means the descendant of Lord Krishna, left the Dwarika kingdom and is therefore commemorated by the Jews as Passover Day. Since Christ is a myth, his resurrection day set to mark Easter is untenable. The resurrection was of Madan, the god of love, means Cupid, who, having disturbed the penance of Lord Shiva, was burned down by an irate Lord Shiva, releasing acidic luster from his third eye. Rati, the wife of Cupid, pleading inconsolably for the resurrection of her husband, was granted her wish by the compassionate Lord Shiva. It is that resurrection which has been traditionally celebrated all over the world. That celebration has been hijacked by Christianity to parade as the day of Jesus' resurrection. Even the seemingly European name Cupid is Sanskrit Kopda, means who caused annoyance to Lord Shiva. These sample instances should convince the viewers that all so-called Christian rituals and observances are invariably of hoary Vedic tradition, and their Son of God, namely Christ, is a mere malpronunciation of the term Krishna, because Krishna was known exactly as a god descended, means avatar, on the earth. Since Christianity, like Islam, is only an hijacked and fossilized branch of Vedic culture, I have shown how every aspect of the so-called Christianity is suspect. The Christian establishment, therefore, has been striving hard throughout the centuries to clutch at some proof of its authenticity. One such termed find was the Dead Sea Scrolls, but on closer examination they were found to expose the bickerings of some disgruntled persons, which led to a counterfeit, synthetic, pseudo-spiritual alloy called Christianity. Therefore, they were suppressed. The second find, which at first enthused the Christian establishment, was the so-called Turin Shroud, in which Jesus' body was supposed to have been warped after crucifixion. On scientific scrutiny, that too was found to be bogus. Therefore, it is time for all Christians to realize that they have been duped spiritually, or more accurately speaking, religiously, because there never was any Jesus. Please watch the portrait of Saint Paul carefully. Since Jesus Christ is a fictitious person, it was Saint Paul who could be said to be the founder of the runaway cult, which has since come to be known as Christianity. I call it runaway because even Saint Paul was himself a follower and preacher of Vedic culture. He was not a Christian, but a Christian, means a follower of Lord Krishna. Look at his Bharatiya apparel, which all Vedic preachers in Bharat still wear. His unabridged and uncorrupted Sanskrit name was obviously Sant Gopal. The Bible came into being centuries after St. Paul. Consequently, the book he is holding in his left hand is the Bhagavad Gita sermon of Lord Krishna. The sword in the right hand is further confirmation, because Bhagavad Gita is the only scripture which urges one to fight relentlessly and fearlessly for a righteous cause. Since neither Jesus nor Paul are its founders, Christianity is a freak, unintended offshoot of Vedic culture. The Sanskrit term Sant continues to be used in Christianity as saint, because Paul alias Gopal was a Vedic Sant, means monk. In the Vedic parlance, The cosmos is known as Brahmanda, means the cosmic egg. The French word monde, meaning the world, is a broken bit of that Sanskrit term. After the Mahabharata war, in circa 5561 BC, when Vedic culture faded out from administratively fragmented and isolated regions of the world, crude depictions of the sibling coiled around by a cobra, as seen in the pictures I have posted, came into vogue until Christianity and Islam stamped them out. Such illustrations are found in various volumes dealing with the pre-Christian world. Lord Shiva, alias the father of the material universe, used to be worshipped all over the ancient world. Some of its representations discovered in archaeological excavations in different regions are depicted in the pictures. It indicates how Arabs who worshipped Lord Shiva in pre-Islamic times lifted the crescent as their emblem from Lord Shiva's head. The coils of the serpent represent the yet unfolded unknown aeons of time. The hood of the cobra symbolizes both the blessing and biting power of divinity as reward or punishment. It is well known that those over whom the cobra raises its hood become people of distinction. That is why Vedic deities are always depicted as reclining or sitting on the coils of multi-hooded cobras, with the hoods serving as blissful canopies. The same serpent power can inflict a fatal bite. Divinity resting on cobra is indicative not only of divinity presiding over the blessing and hissing mechanism of the mysterious cosmos, but also itself being above such mundane considerations of good and bad and blissful or fearful. As per Christian tradition, a star guided some wise men from the east to the birth spot to the divine child Jesus. If that were true, then why is his day of birth, date, time, and year all unknown? His birth celebrations are termed Xmas. Why not Y Mass or Z Mass? Moreover, X does not signify Jesus and Mass does not mean a birthday. So how come Xmas is celebrated as Jesus' birthday? His mother Mary is claimed to be a virgin, but virginity and simultaneous motherhood are a contradiction in terms. A virgin cannot be a mother, nor can a mother be a virgin. In fact, the very word virginity in its Sanskrit origin, quote, Virgyam Jananam iti, unquote, signifies a state where procreation is ruled out. X is the Roman numeral 10 and Mas is the Sanskrit word meaning month. Therefore, Xmas signifies the 10th month of the ancient Vedic calendar. And so it is because the Vedic New Year begins in March at the vernal equinox. Counting March as the first month, December is actually the 10th month. That is why the very term December is Sanskrit meaning Dasha Ambar, means the 10th part of the zodiac.